Okay, so welcome. Today I am here with Dr. Lisa Lewis, who I'm extremely excited to have her time on a Monday nonetheless. Dr. Lisa Lewis has been practicing psychology for more than 18 years, and I have been following her on social media for quite some time, and I'm also planning on taking a course that she has online called Psych Skills for Fit Pros. She has taught at university psychology courses, and you'll probably see her face a lot now because she's speaking at several fitness related events. So Lisa, thanks for being on with me. And if you want to add anything to the introduction or talk a little bit about your background, please do.
Oh, well, thank you, first of all, for having me. I'm excited to get to talk to you and your audience. And you summed it up really nicely. I think what I would add is that I'm a psychotherapist by trade. I've been having one-to-one conversations that are focused on the other person for a long time now. So the skills of counseling and communication and helping people change are really where I think, my skill set and the audience and you overlap. So I always hope to try to bring that knowledge in and provide it in a way that your listeners can apply to the work they're doing, even though they're not doing therapy.
Right, exactly. And absolutely. And I hear a lot of trainers say that at some point they feel like their client's therapist. And although it's said in tongue in cheek, that is a serious feeling that you might have in relationships with clients. And it's one that I don't think should be taken lightly. And I know that some of the information that we will talk about today will help trainers, I think, get a better understanding of really what role is appropriate for them to play and when they need to maybe even take a step back and begin to encourage their clients to pursue having conversations with someone like yourself.
This topic that you're bringing up is really the reason why I found myself more and more in the fitness space and working with people, not just coaches, but also physical therapists, chiropractors, massage therapists, nutrition coaches, because not only do all those helpers get those feelings, but there's no training and there's no support around it. So I kept getting more and more requests to talk about issues that come up, which encouraged me to kind of try to learn more about the field, offer curriculum in this area, because I do think it's something that can burn folks out, especially people who really, really care and who want to help their clients and who want to make change. I think, those of us who care the most are the most vulnerable to really get burnout or taken advantage of because we have that goodwill and that desire to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's become such standard practice for coaches to develop a network of other professionals that they partner with to refer out to. If I'm training someone and they have an injury, I'm not going to be the one who's going to help them work through that. I'm going to refer them out to a PT or maybe an AT if they're an athlete.
Yeah.
And I think if we can do that, there should be no reason why we wouldn't do the same thing on the mental side of things.
Amen.
When we feel like we're in a position where a client is wanting to maybe further the relationship into something more emotional, or they're asking us to talk to them about some emotionally charged topic, that might not be an area that I think on the surface level, it's okay. But at some point it gets to a place where you might want to have a partner on the other side to be able to say, I know this great woman, Dr. Lisa Lewis, she specifically works with this stuff. Would you be willing for me to make an introduction with her?
Yeah. And I think for a number of reasons, but two main ones is I always think of Dan John saying the goal is to keep the goal the goal.
Yeah.
And to the point that whatever the client is bringing into session is taking away from the objective, So if your objective is to get them stronger, but you're spending a lot of time not being able to strength train because you're taking care of emotions that come up, it's taking away from the goal, number one. Number two, it's what is the best use of your time and your service that's going to help you feel like you're being productive and effective, and is going to help that client to feel like they're getting out of it what they want. And so even though clients come in and say, okay, I want you to help me lose weight or get stronger, when they come in and if they start to vent or bring other things on you, they are taking away from their ability to get that out. So I would say to coaches, if you're having a feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm carrying all this, or I'm holding all this, or I have to create this container for them to talk about their divorce for 12 minutes, that feeling or those thoughts is data that it's going beyond your scope, or that you're losing your ability to do your job well. And you don't have to push those feelings away or judge yourself. You just can think to yourself, okay, I think it's kind of getting away, and this person obviously needs more support in this area than what I can provide in like the 4 minutes before we start training.
Yeah, absolutely. And knowing that if your client is talking to you about those issues, they obviously trust you to a degree that they might not trust other people. And you might be the best person in their life in that moment to recommend therapy or counseling, or just having a conversation with a professional who does know what they're doing in regards to those issues.
Exactly. How many times in your week do you get one person who's giving you 100% of their bandwidth?
Never.
Never. So here's this person, they're thinking about you, they're looking at you, they're listening to you, they learn about your body and your lifestyle and your habits. Like, that is really good stuff. You have such a rich resource that you are offering. So of course, when they've got all that bandwidth and attention coming at them, of course, if there's some other area of need, it might present itself either in a comment or, by being vented, something like that. It doesn't mean anything bad about that person. It's just the nature of the dynamic. Your attention is such a valuable commodity, and we really don't get a lot of other people's undivided attention. So if you give that and you're a person who cares and shows it, watch out, because you're definitely going to get, more than you bargained for in that space a lot of the time. So the more you can practice having healthy boundaries and being able to address when there's this kind of spillover, the better you'll do for yourself, but also the better you'll do for your clients, because you may be the only person who's picking up that this person's like really, really stressed out and kind of becoming tearful anytime they're talking about it, or is really, really anxious and uncomfortable and jittery all the time. And so you being able, just like referring to massage therapy or nutrition counseling, or being able to say, I notice whenever we get together, you seem like you're really tense and you're going really fast, and you say that your thoughts are racing and you're worrying about a lot of things. I wonder if talking to somebody about all your thinking could be helpful, because it seems like it's really bugging you. And it's a lot of what we talk about when we're together. That's non-pathologizing. You're not using a word like anxiety or depression or mental illness. You're just talking about improving functioning and improving quality of life, which is totally in your lane, regardless of if you're a chiro, massage therapist, or a coach. And so I think just getting comfortable developing like a word bank or a handful of sentences that you feel are authentic to you, but also directly address what you're observing, can be wicked helpful in just kind of creating that space and naming something, and then being able to focus on, the reasons why you're together.
Yeah, absolutely. And the example you gave was helpful. I think a lot of trainers, at least speaking from doing it myself and knowing a lot of people in the field, that having that conversation to even say, how is this going to come off if I'm recommending that they talk to someone? But the way you put it is essentially what you're doing is you're sharing your observation of what's going on in the relationship. And it's, here's what I objectively observe about what you're presenting to me when you come in to train, is you've told me yourself that you're feeling overly stressed at work. You've told me yourself this thing. And so you're not putting words in their mouths, you're replaying back to them what, even though they're saying it, they might be completely unaware that they're even verbalizing it to you.
Yeah. So a psychiatrist that used to give me supervision here and there would say, observe and describe. And she worked with college students for like decades, and that population, they get nervous about being pathologized and being labeled something. And I think a lot of human beings are. So I really liked that idea of just observe and describe. You don't have to make any evaluations. You don't have to jump to any conclusions. You don't have to have any answers like that. If you feel the concern, you can always just observe and describe. And I think that even if you think a person is wicked, wicked depressed, I think taking a non-pathologizing, meaning not calling it an illness,
Yeah.
I think that approach just leaves it open, because some people that I've worked with, they like once there's a name to it, if I name it and say
Yeah.
it really sounds like depression, they find relief in that, but a lot of people hate it. They do not like that idea if they come from a culture of origin or a place where like mental illness is not a thing,
Right.
which many people still, so I just try to avoid that language as much as I can and try to focus on, like you said, reflecting somebody's own words with my empathy, with in my way, so I don't feel like I'm just parroting them. And then just kind of leaving it and seeing how they respond to that. And keeping in mind, you might need to say it more than once. You might say it once and then they say, yeah. And then 3 weeks go by. And then the next time they start crying, they're like, I know, you're probably right. So you think about like planting the seed for some people, and that seed might not blossom for a long time, but it doesn't mean that it had no effect.
Right. Yeah. So well said. Wow. All right. So moving on, one of the things that I was most curious about in regards to what you do for work, because I do think it would translate for people in our spaces, you come from with the education that you have, you come from what at a broad level, I would say is a scientific background. And when you communicate out what you know and the experiences that you've had over the course of your career, I'd imagine that you're communicating with two very different audiences. On one side, you probably communicate quite often with your peers that are at the same level or have that same education that you do. And then in the other side, what we get to see is you communicating what you know with us, which naturally you have to translate in a way that's not technical, because we don't have that same education that you do. And I think trainers and coaches have to do the same thing.
All the time.
It's as simple as anatomy, or what you and I were talking about, just talking about the process of fat loss. When you're speaking with your peers, you can say it one way, but that one way does not work on the other side, which is with your clients or if you're working with youth. I'm curious for you personally, when you engage with someone who does not have that same background that you do, what are some of the considerations that you're making with how you're relaying your information?
So there's a really broad spectrum of the way people like to communicate. And when I went to graduate school, my doctoral degree was in the scientist practitioner model. That's the way it was labeled.
Okay.
And at the time, I didn't really appreciate that. So if you have like a Psychology 101 textbook, it will say there's scientists in psychology who do research and, focus on statistics, and they're in labs and they're working with subjects. And then there are practitioners who are in applied settings and they're doing counseling and they're doing intervention. Okay. So scientist practitioner model is basically learning how to do both and deciding where you want to land professionally on the spectrum. And what I've really grown to appreciate about that education is that it helped me to be able to translate both ways. So it helps me be able to read an abstract in a peer-reviewed article and to actually look at the results section where the statistics are, and to be able to talk to somebody about, here's what this actually means, somebody who's a client of mine. And then in the other direction, for example, right now I'm serving as a consultant for a tech startup in digital wellness. So I'm interacting with people who develop software, with other doctors who are much more academic, who want to know about what kind of surveys to use and what kind of interventions are going to get us significant results. And I have to communicate back with them about what people actually care about and what they don't, how long of a survey they would actually want to fill out. And the translation of when somebody says, I just feel really blah, I don't feel like doing anything, I lost my mojo. What they really mean is they're presenting with anhedonia. And so that ability to go back and forth and be a translator, I really think is like cross-training. I think it keeps you really fit, because you have to be able to do both, and you have to be able to, in order to teach it, you have to understand it. And I think that's really helped me a lot to feel up to date on things, and to feel like there's meaning behind the ways that I counsel people. It's not just sitting and chatting. So I think it's a very difficult process, but it's totally worthwhile. And your audience probably does that too. They probably do continuing ed where, you know, they learn about all kinds of, like, I think about PRI and how far down a rabbit hole you get, you know, and you can't go down that rabbit hole with your clients, but you have to somehow talk them into doing some alligator breathing. And how are you going to do that? You know, how are you going to talk them into that when they want to lose 50 pounds? So we all have to develop skills, and along that spectrum, what I try to assess is to what degree is that individual influenced by or motivated by competency. So we have 3 basic psychological needs. They are autonomy, competency, and relatedness. So we want to feel like we're in charge. We want to feel connected to others. And we want to feel like not only that we know stuff, but that we can learn and gain mastery and competency. So some people really love to learn, and they really want to know, like they want to peek down the PRI rabbit hole and understand why they should be doing the alligator breathing, and they will listen to you and they will love it, and it will enhance their motivation to actually do some breathing drills. Other people are like, whatever, just tell me what to do. And then let's go get after, I trust you. So you're always like gauging as you get to know your clients and that relationship. You know, what we say in therapy is doing the dance. And the dance is really, how do I engage with you so that we can maximize the effect that you're going to get? How much education do you like and need? How much fills your tank up? And then where's the point of diminishing returns? And that's really different.
Yeah. So
different clients.
Are you saying that you're taking cues from that person that you're interacting with to gauge how much of an appetite they have? And those cues might come in the form of questions that they're asking, or maybe you give them an extra detail that isn't essential to them understanding. And if they show some type of curiosity, that's that cue that, or the thread that you're going to pull on to say, okay, maybe I can take this one step further. But it's always this, I go here, if you follow, then maybe I'll go here and then you'll follow. And if you don't follow, then we're just going to stay right here because that's where you've told me that we're done.
Yeah. And you're looking at their nonverbals also. So if somebody's like leaning in and they're like, ooh, tell me more about my ribs, then go. You know, if they're like starting to check out, then get them moving again. You know, so you're attending to nonverbals. You're also, you know, some people might come back the next session and say, I was trying to tell my wife about that thing you said about how I'm in my right hip. Like, what was that? That's good. It means they want to learn it. They want to have some mastery over it. It matters to them. And if they never bring it up again and they just do the reps, then they probably don't care. So one of the things as a scientist practitioner, one of the things I learned when I was at my pre-doctoral internship, a supervisor said to me, every single thing that happens in session is data. Every word that gets said, everything that happens is information. And so because I'm always looking to fill the 3 basic psychological needs, autonomy, competency, and relatedness, I do tend towards offering education, information, and I'm watching to see how that individual responds to that, you know, how much they like and don't like. And I think, you know, coaches have so much technical education, so much knowledge around physiology and anatomy and programming, you know, so some people really would love to hear that information. Why did you do the program this way? And other people are just like, whatever, just beat me up and let me go about my day. So if you can figure out where your clients lie along that spectrum and engage with them there, it's going to help you to keep their motivation, you know, as that tank as full as you possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. What would be, so I know a lot of coaches that are extremely competent and they know a lot of the academic side of what they do, and their default approach is to just share that with everybody. What are the downsides of oversharing information with someone who's not open to receiving it from a coaching standpoint?
Do you mean information that maybe like they wouldn't want to hear, or?
Yeah. So somebody who's maybe using a lot of technical terminology, but they're not paying attention to those cues that you mentioned about a client in the long run, do you think that erodes do you think it erodes the relationship in any way, that they're not paying attention to the cues that their clients are giving them about sharing information in a way that's not clear?
Yeah, because if the client is giving cues that they've had enough, or they don't get it, or they're not interested, and then the other person's not picking that up, then there's a misfire.
Mm-hmm.
So one important topic in counseling psychology, which I feel has a lot of overlap to this subject, is reciprocity.
Mm-hmm.
So are you able to pick up what I'm putting down, and vice versa? So are you and I engaged in a dynamic where we can read each other's verbal and nonverbal cues and change topic, or address the, give more, give less, that sort of thing. Limbic resonance is another thing that it's called in the emotion literature. Is we come pre-wired with the ability to focus on somebody else's face and how they're moving their face and how they change their inflection, to be able to pick up the cue of say more, say less,
Mm-hmm.
show empathy, smile,
Mm-hmm.
frown, all of that. And we start practicing that from day one,
Right. Yeah.
So if you're not doing that, if you're not picking it up, what your client's giving back to you, and you're not resonating, you're
Mm-hmm.
not having that reciprocity, then you're going to damage their relationship, because the person's feeling like, I could not care less about this.
Yeah.
Do you see me like crossing my eyes? Yeah. So
exactly.
this is like social skills, like
Mm-hmm.
basic social skills. Yeah. And so if a coach is like really, really wanting to disseminate this knowledge and expertise that they have, that's good, but also be in touch with what your client actually wants. Because if your client doesn't want that, it doesn't matter if you're like the number one in the world.
Right. And I also think it speaks to the importance of developing a community of people on either side. I think it's super important that coaches have a peer group that they can have these discussions with, because that's how you develop your knowledge, and that's how you get checked by other professionals who are in that same space, who can ask you questions and who can take in what you're saying, probe at it, or offer you more to add to it. Your clients aren't typically the right people for that job. It's you're taking advantage of that relationship or asking them to play a role that's probably completely inappropriate for what you're trying to accomplish. Whereas really what you need to do is develop a peer group to have those types of discussions with.
Yeah. And if you like to geek out and get in the weeds, it would be important for you to have that kind of circle. What you just said reminds me, only in the last year, maybe year and a half since the pandemic, every 2 weeks, I have lunch online with one of my mentors from grad school and 3 of his colleagues. They're all in their 70s.
Cool.
3 of them are sleep psychologists, actually, and then my mentor. And it is hilarious to be on this call. And so last week, one of the psychologists on the call was going on and on and on, talking about a case. And then he said, and there's just like a large amount of ventilation of affect. And I was like, did you just say venting? I've never heard ventilation of affect. And I thought this was hilarious. And they're like, you're so young, you don't remember the days when we used to have that on assessments. And it made me laugh, because I thought, like, venting is an actual thing. Like, it's a clinically recognized important thing. We just call it venting, not putting any value on that. But the importance of for me, I really appreciate being with that group. That's just one little thing that I laughed about that I learned, but I probably get to say or hear 15 things every lunchtime. That's very, very academic or super duper clinical that I wouldn't necessarily learn about or talk about when I'm with my clients.
Right. Wow. How neat that you do that. I think that's something that's from a professional development standpoint, having the courage to put yourself in a position where you can have that type of experience, where you're interacting with people who have been in the field for a really long time and come to it from the perspective of, I'm not just going to take from these people, but you also, I'm sure, bring something to the table for them, working with probably a group of people than they have, or just being more involved in what's currently going on. That's cool.
Yeah, the collegiality is so fabulous. And I also think one thing that isn't out there in the fitness industry that I see is like peer supervision, peer support, just to get to, so I meet with those guys every other week. And then the weeks I don't meet with them, I have lunch with someone I went to grad school with, who's also in private practice, she's a professional musician. So we did go to a sports psych program together, but she works with musicians and people who are performers. And we talk about cases, and we talk about what, running the private practice and what comes up around that. And sometimes we do just need to ventilate some affect, you know what I mean? But it's really helpful to have that peer time that is dedicated. And I think that in fitness, I don't see that carve out for people to just sit and maybe talk about a really annoying client or really challenging stuff that's going on around like emails and text messages and just things that come up that can deplete you as a coach. So I think it's great if you can find some kind of group, whether it's to keep your skills sharp, academically, or if it's just to have that professional contact and collegiality.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's humbling and also extremely rewarding. All right. One thing that I mentioned to you before we started this is a lot of the value that I saw you bringing to this was being able to provide a perspective on questions that I sometimes get asked that are outside of what I do. And I mentioned to you that I could give my best shot in answering the questions, but it would be out of my scope. One question that I've been asked on multiple occasions is around the context of, so let's say you are a coach, you're working at a gym and you have a team. So there are other coaches there, you have a manager, and you are in a position where you've learned that someone has said something inappropriate or unprofessional to the point where you're wanting to confront them, because in that instance, it either feels like a direct threat to you or it is in conflict with what you've decided are your values, or if you have like a zero tolerance policy to something. And I think it's more so a question of, how do you know when is the right time to approach someone if there's something you want to talk to them about that's a contentious topic? Or how do you do so in a way that's effective, that doesn't put you in a position that threatens your job? I think, and I especially find this with female coaches that I talk to, feeling like they need to have a conversation, and in their intuition, they really want to have this conversation, but the threats on the other side of where that conversation could lead to feel overwhelming to the point where they just decide not to have the conversation. And then they don't feel good about that either. Yeah.
So this is a tricky question. And if I were talking to a woman like this, a person like this, first, I would want to check their gut, because their gut is probably telling them good stuff. If they have reason, if they have pause, I would want to check out, like, describe to me what this setting is like, because some gyms, they have a manual and they have procedures and there's a person you go to. If you're at a larger organization, there's probably an HR office. But if you're in a mom and pop, like, it might feel like the Wild West, and there's really no organized way to go about it. And so if you're in a disorganized or really small kind of entity, there's less protection there. There's probably less protocol there. And so then if that were the case for this person, then I would want to check out, okay, who are the cast of characters? Let's talk through what's gone on, and let's talk through what you want out of the communication. Like, what do you want to be different at the end? And I think that does a couple things. Number one, it can help to clarify what are the steps that you should take. And number two, it helps to manage expectations. Because if you're working with somebody who's can be a jerk or can say things that are inappropriate, is what you're wanting is for that person to like change who they are as a person and to start acting like a gentleman. Is that a reasonable expectation? Are you wanting them to say, oh my God, I'm so sorry, that was so insensitive, I should have never ever said that? Like, that might happen, but it might not. And so how can we talk through what happens if the person gets really upset and defensive? What happens if the person gets pissed off? What happens if the person wants to retaliate? Let's talk through that and who else you could bring in to the mix. So I think it's one of those questions you're asking where there's a lot of it depends.
Okay.
And I would really want to spend some time with that individual, thinking about the environment and how they can protect themselves. Because I would never want to invalidate what somebody's gut is telling them. And if they're afraid of retaliation, and I've worked with a handful of women where they're the only female coach.
Yeah.
And so they might have concerns and feedback that has never been presented in that culture. And it's important to talk about how might this be received?
Yes.
And what do you want to have happen as a result? How would you be able to maintain the integrity of the relationships and the rapport that you have? And I mean, I can think of one client in particular, or one woman I consulted with a little bit, who, we talked about it, and she's like, I actually hate it there, and I hate my job, and I hate the culture, and I hate the environment, and I don't care if I end up leaving after this conversation. So that's a very different space, to be in, where you can be very, very assertive and clear and care a lot less about the outcome, as opposed to somebody who really wants to stay there, who really wants to maintain whatever kind of relationship there is. So I know it's probably an
that's great.
satisfying answer.
No, it is. And what I hear you saying, and I think it's a step that a lot of people miss, is you have to take time to sit and plan out what are the possibilities of what this conversation is going to look like. And because it can go any number of ways, and all you can really control is how you go into the situation. You're in no way can guess or control what the other person is going to do. But if you haven't thought about all of the ways that they could respond, and then you get into it and they respond in a way that surprises you, typically what you've done is set yourself up to maybe become defensive or say something that you're going to later regret. And I think the planning aspect of what you're talking about is a step that's often overlooked, because people, they feel that emotion and they want to take advantage of the emotion. It's like, well, I feel this right now and I want to act on it before that feeling goes away, because if it goes away, then I might not have the courage to do it. But from my experience, acting on emotion for that type of conversation is usually the worst approach.
There's the guy who's the father of group psychotherapy. His name is Irving Yalom, and he famously wrote, the best time for feedback is to strike when the iron is cold.
Oh, I like that.
So that means when there's not emotions in the mix. So you should, if you're bent out of shape about something, you should talk about it and process your affect and let it chill. Not that your emotions are not important.
Right.
It's just that you want to be sure about, what am I actually feeling, and how much of this is about the environment, is about the individual, how much of this could be my stuff. And then if I am to say something, how might I feel after that? So it's very important to take that time for all of that, because your emotions, and we might get to talk a little bit more about emotions, but emotions are basically predictions. It's your body's way of preparing you for some kind of reaction. And a prediction is just a guess. So you could have this impulsive, really upset or unsafe kind of a feeling. And after thinking about it or processing it, it might have something to do with your own history that has very little to do with the context. It could totally be that other person. I don't know, but striking while the iron is hot just increases the chances that people are going to say things they don't mean, that the emotion's going to overtake being able to communicate clearly. Just last week, I was talking to a few female friends who were complaining about how when they get really stressed and really upset, they cry, and how embarrassing and infuriating it is to be crying when you're trying to make a point to a boss or something. And they were saying I hate it, hate it, hate it. And it's because they were in the heat of the moment and they were so worked up and so angry. That's how their body reacted. And they really felt at a disadvantage, in that communication. So I think definitely let the heat pass before you have an important conversation.
Yeah. And I've also, from the people that I know who have experienced something like this, what people will tend to do is go and find someone to vent to. That's not the person with the problem. And they don't always make the best decision about who to vent to, because you might go and vent to someone and that person might be someone who is just completely behind you. And you know, you're right, this is a terrible thing that happened to you. You need to say something, you need to do this. And yet that might not be the best approach. So I also think taking the time to consider, who am I going to talk to about this? And will that person ask me questions to be able to uncover what I'm not seeing right now? Or is this person just going to back me because that's the type of person they are? And is that really what I need them to do?
Right. So, you know, there's two ways to think about it. One is no overlap in the Venn diagram. Like if this is another coach or this is someone, that person is going to be influenced by their own relationship with whomever. So if they like that person, they might dissuade you. If they hate that person, they might be, you know, amping you up even more. So try to think about somebody who's outside of the situation. And then also, if it's a bigger institution, think about in the upward direction. Is there somebody in an HR department or something that is like a boundaried safe space for you to communicate with?
Yeah, I love that. And even just, I think the act of journaling about it before you get into the situation. And some of the questions that you mentioned that I think were great were, what do I want to get out of this? What is the ultimate outcome or my ideal outcome? What do I think they would want to get out of this? What are the possible reactions they could have to me approaching them about this? And how might I respond to those reactions? I love that. Great suggestions. Thank you. All right. And to build on that, talking about emotions, there will inevitably be times when we do get in situations where we react based on emotions, and almost the minute we're done, we have that feeling of, oh shit, why did I let myself react about that? I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have done that. That's not who I am, or that's not, I'm not proud of what I just did. And that's just an aspect of being human. I'm curious, in those moments, obviously there's a lot of, I think, just guilt and shame that happen with acting outside of what you want your character to be. What are things that we need to keep in mind when we go to remedy those types of situations? And I know this is broad, so if we need to define it more, please let me know.
Yeah, well, let me start at the most micro level, which is to say that all feelings are valid. So whatever a person feels, that's valid. So it's not that the feeling is bad or wrong. A lot of times people will experience shame about something. And shame is, I am bad, like my feeling is bad, my thoughts are bad. And that's not a thing. Your feelings, your thoughts, those are yours and they're okay. The behaviors you can feel bad about, and that's guilt, right? So saying something you didn't mean or whatever. So I think first it's important for people to just remember that we're human beings and sometimes we overreact or react in a way that's incongruent with the situation. And that's because we're an onion of experiences and memories and things that we've learned. And at all times, our brain is taking all of those layers of the onion and all of those experiences and trying to predict the way that you should behave in the environment in order to be safe and in order to have the best outcome. It's like the most complicated, sophisticated machine that there is. And so if you have had experiences where you've been mistreated or you've been put down or you've been taken advantage of, or you've been hurt, like every person on earth, there's going to be things in life that are triggering and that evoke a reaction, an impulse that maybe isn't what you would have done if you would have had more time to think about it. So first, I just want to normalize that's what happens in life. I think going beyond that, it is important for all of us to know what our blind spots are and how our life's experience has shaped the way we see the world. You know, the things that we are looking out for, or the things that we are hypersensitive to. So some folks out there might be wicked sensitive to criticism. Like any statement by a client that like your programming's not perfect or they're not super happy might like keep you up at night and crush you.
Mhm.
And it's important to know like that's a thing that I do. That's a way that I get. And of course, clients are going to complain, you know,
Yeah, that's
because
what
it's
they
hard
do.
to change your behavior. It's hard to
Yeah.
get leaner. It's hard to get stronger. It's hard to stop eating Oreos. Like all of these things that we're encouraging our clients to do is really, really hard. And you cannot take it personal. So if you take that stuff personal, it's important for you to know that's a thing that you do. And then to think about how can I work on that? Because I'm going to beat myself up if I take it personal every time, you know, a client complains about whatever.
Yeah,
Isn't
absolutely.
so the awareness piece and knowing thyself is a really important part of that. Remembering you're human, knowing thyself, and then keeping in mind, like the same way you're practicing coaching or you're practicing athletic training, you're practicing being a human being. You're practicing communicating, learning about yourself and how you interact with others. So if you come about it with a mindset of having positive intention to do your best, and when you do something that you're dissatisfied with or you're not happy or proud about, what can you do that's corrective?
Right.
What can you do that will help you to feel like you've done something to take care of that? I think a lot of times people feel like they can't go back once they've had a confrontation, or they don't want to bring it up again, or the moment passed where they should have said something and they didn't. And that's not true. You can always go back. You can always find another way if it's important to you and if you feel like it's important to the relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. That I love that you said that about the moment passing. And I think it's a really convenient excuse to say, well, it's been a week and I haven't seen them and I'm just going to move on. And hopefully they did too. But a lot of people aren't going to forget. People don't forget things. And although they might not talk about it, I think there's always going to be that underlying aspect of it. And just recently I went to a multi-day personal development retreat. And one thing that we did that really resonated for me was when you do something that falls outside of your character that maybe you're not proud of, instead of going back and explaining it, telling that person what you're committed to moving forward and saying, here's what happened. I want to listen to what went on with you when this happened, but I also want you to know that moving forward, this is what I'm committed to. So that there is, it not only is it a demonstration of you seeing that there's value in that relationship and communicating that to them, but also saying like, I know that I play a role in this and I've done some thinking on my own and this is what you can expect of me moving forward.
Yeah. I think it takes the weight off the other person of having that moment of like excuse, like, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. Like you're taking ownership. So you sort of take that pressure off. And I like the way you worded, I'm open to hearing whatever you want to say about what this experience, what that was like for you, because you're not saying, tell me, you're just leaving it opened. And I just think it's really a good way to take care of the relationship. So people say, oh, weeks passed or months passed or years passed. And like, it would be weird to go back to it. And it reminds me of soft tissue work. So it's probably people who are listening who either do it or who have had done, you know, Graston and ART and dry needling. And if you think about the benefit of having those kinds of treatments, you are improving the quality of soft tissue to improve range of motion, to thereby open the capacity for greater strength. So can you continue in a relationship with somebody where you had a couple bumps and like little ruptures or damage to the relationship? Yeah, you could. And would the client be thinking about that every day? Maybe not, but there's going to be a little scar tissue in there.
Yeah.
That may cause a limited range of motion in your relationship, how much trust there is, how much flexibility there is, how much openness there is. And so is it not functioning? No. Does it contribute to dysfunction? Yeah. And you want the highest quality of functioning possible. And anybody who's listening who beats themselves up getting like Graston and ART, like they're going for the maximum health in their tissue quality they could possibly have. And I would argue you want the maximum quality in your relationships as well. So you don't want old injuries and scar tissues and knots screwing up, your ability to get your clients stronger. And you can always go back and take care of them, even if they're old.
Yeah. Wow. What a beautiful analogy. It's like, you know what you're doing.
Well, over the years, I have, I love strength training too. I think, I love getting after it in the gym. So I think there's millions and millions and millions of overlaps. And I do think that being able to talk about the physical parts of being fit and being healthy destigmatize even further. It helps people to understand, like, why would I care about my mental health? Why would I think and talk about, my thoughts and feelings and communications with others? It just makes it so that being able to use those analogies makes it so that people are like, oh yeah.
Right. Wow.
Improves buy-in, I think.
Yeah. Well, we're nearing the top of the hour, Lisa, and I wanted to make sure that you got a couple of minutes and just because I'm also interested, can you talk a little bit about the course that you have that's Psych Skills for Fit Pros, and then anything that you're working on coming up that might be of interest to anyone that stayed with us through this conversation?
Oh yeah, thank you. So yes, because of doing work like this and webinars and in-services, I did end up creating a course called Psych Skills for Fit Pros. And Volume 1 has been out there for, I think, 2 years now. Volume 1 addresses really the foundations of psychology in athletic and fitness settings, which is the theory of motivation, understanding what motivation is and how to identify your clients' motives and leverage them to get the best out of them, not just for changing their behavior, but also for persisting over time in healthy behaviors. The second main module is about the stages of change and the process of change. So really only 20% of the process of change is action. The other 80% is like thinking about it, getting ready for it, being nervous about it. And all of us love the action part. We love the 20% part, and we get frustrated and impatient with the rest of it. So it's very important for all of us, for our longevity in the business, to understand what that process looks like and how to help people move forward, because they move along in a predictable process. And if somebody's not ready to take action and you're pushing them, it's going to backfire.
Yeah.
So that's the second main portion of the course. And then the third portion focuses on motivational interviewing, which is a whole huge toolbox of communication techniques that are focused on eliciting change from the person that you're trying to help. I love motivational interviewing because I do think that any person, regardless of their age, their ethnic background, their lifestyle, can utilize these skills in a way that's authentic to how they talk and their personality and the way they practice. And they've been used in almost any setting you can imagine. I think it was developed in smoking cessation programming, and now has been used in all different kinds of health behavior settings. So I just think motivational interviewing is a great way to get people thinking about, like, what are these communication skills and how do I use them in an intentional way? So that's Volume 1. You can find it a few different ways. One is through my website, which is drlewisconsulting.com. And you can go to the products page. Another way that you can find it is psychskillsforfitpros.com.
Okay.
And that I have approved for CEUs, continuing education credits, through the NSCA and through NASM as well.
Very cool.
It's 1.3 CEU.
Okay.
And right now I'm at the fledgling stage of creating Volume 2, which is a lot more related to what we've talked about today.
Okay.
The working title right now is Inside the Coach's Mind, and it's focused on the coach's psychology. So your own past and experiences and how that influences your communications and how you see the world, your communication style, to use your words, like your self-image, how you see yourself, and then how that affects your communication and your interaction with others. So that one's proving to be a lot more work because in the fitness and sports industry, there are not people who have written textbooks about how to apply that stuff. So I'm I'm basically translating all
Oh.
from psychology and psychotherapy, and trying to make it really make sense and matter and be salient to people who are listening, and people in the fitness industry. So stay tuned for that. But
Yeah.
and I'd say finally, anybody who's listening, please follow me on Instagram, because that's my little like petri dish. And I'm always every week trying to put out content connecting strength training and fitness to mental health and wellness. So that's just an easy way to be in touch with what I'm writing about or thinking about.
Yeah, and that's where I came across you first. And something I love that you do is everything you post about, you have a personal anecdote to go with it. And what attracted to me to what you do is it felt so easy to understand and accessible. And that's not something that you find very often. So I second what you're saying, and I will put all these links for the video when I post this recording.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Terrific. Well, thank you, Lisa. I appreciate
Thank you so much, Jenny. Yeah, the time flew by.
Wonderful to meet you, and I'm sure everyone will really enjoy this.